I thank the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for yielding, and I want to thank him for the extraordinary work he has done to put this package together. I want to thank Mr. Lewis for the work that he has done as well, even though he may not agree with the product, the final product. I want to start my remarks, and I may take a little bit of time. I want to start my remarks in talking about bipartisanship and how we got here and why we're here. Over a year ago, it appeared to us that the economic program adopted in 2001, 2003 was not working. It also appeared to the administration that it was not working. It appeared to Mr. Boehner that it was not working, that we were in real trouble, that we weren't producing jobs. We'd had the worst 8 years of job production that we've had in any administration since Herbert Hoover. And as a result of the failure to produce jobs, our country was in great distress, and our people were challenged and at risk. And so the administration and the Democratic leadership of the Congress and the Republican leadership of the Congress sat down at the table together, came up with a program to stimulate the economy, about $160 billion. And we worked together in a bipartisan fashion. It was a Republican president, but a Democratic-led Congress. In fact, agreed to the administration's increase in that program, as you recall, because we had suggested $100 billion. And we worked in a bipartisan fashion. And then in September, some months later, Secretary Paulson, the Republican Secretary of the Treasury, came to us, met with the leadership, and said, we have a crisis. Indeed, we had invited him down because we thought that there was real trouble. He said, we have a crisis. We need to act. We need to act immediately. A Democratic-led Congress responded to Secretary Paulson and said, we'll work with you. We'll work with you because our country needs a joint response. And we did that. And when that legislation came to the floor, very frankly, a majority of Democrats supported the Republican administration's request. A majority of his party in this House did not. We now have a Democratic administration and a Democratic-led Congress. And I'm hopeful that we'll have bipartisan work continuing to meet this crisis, caused, from my perspective, by the failure of policies that we've been pursuing economically over the last 8 years. I do not say that for the purposes of being partisan. I say it for the purposes of us being instructed on what has worked and what has not worked. As you know, we're dealing with one of the worst economic climates in memory. 2.6 million jobs lost last year. The worst housing market since the Great Depression. Financial turmoil that has threatened the savings and retirement of millions. That's the context in which this administration is taking office. As we move to confront this crisis, we welcome the criticism of our Republican friends and others. But let's put that criticism in some context. Again, not for a partisan sense, but for a sense of instruction of the perception of what worked and what did not. I would suggest that, frankly, much of what I've heard from my Republican colleagues over the last 20 years in terms of what would work and what would not work was inaccurate. Let's remember President Bush saying, and I quote, "My administration remains focused on economic growth that will create more jobs." Let's remember how the minority party reacted to the Clinton economic plan in 1993. Newt Gingrich said of that plan that it would lead to, and I quote, "a job-killing recession." The leader of the Republican Party made that observation. He was dead, flat, 100% wrong. In fact, we created 22 point some odd million jobs in those 8 years, an average of 256,000 per month. This administration's average less than 40. You need 100 to stay even. John Boehner, the Republican leader, said at that point in time, and I quote, The message is loud and clear. Cut spending first and shrink the size of the federal government in opposing the economic program. In reality, the Democratic plan led to unprecedented economic growth. We all know that. The 90s were the best economic period of time, statistically, that we've had in this country in the service of anybody in this Congress, including the Reagan years. Let's remember how Republicans reacted to the Budget Reconciliation Act in 1990, when George Bush the first was President of the United States. Tom DeLay said, and I quote, "The Democratic package will destroy our economy." Now, the Democratic package was, of course, was an accommodation made between President Bush, Dick Darman, the head of OMB, and ourselves. In reality, that program, opposed overwhelmingly by Republicans, reduced the budget deficit by approximately $482 billion. What we have seen from our Republican colleagues is a history, frankly, of overstatement of what their program would do, and a great understatement of what the programs and policies that we pursued would do. I would suggest that we consider the representations being made today in that context. Today, I hope that our Republican colleagues will put that history aside and join with us to pass this bill and try to help restore our prosperity. None of us have served in this Congress at a lower ebb of the economy than today. Nobody in this Congress, including John Dingell, the Dean of the Congress of the United States. American Recovery and Reinvestment Act is projected to create or save 3 to 4 million jobs. What does it do? I know Mr. Obey has said this, but let me repeat it. Tax relief, $275 billion to working Americans and to small businesses. States will be helped. Policemen, teachers won't have to be laid off so that we can keep our communities safe and our children educated. Core investments in infrastructure. I know we'd like to do more in infrastructure. The sad news is it's tough to spend it quickly in the infrastructure field. We need to do more. We will do more. Protecting vulnerable populations. People are in food lines historically long. People are unemployed in historic numbers. States are stretched with their Medicaid assistance to people who need health care. In energy, we've all talked about energy independence. We had a big debate last year about energy independence and how to get there. This bill deals with energy independence and creating jobs in the course of getting to energy independence. Health care, we all know. John McCain talked about it in his campaign. Barack Obama talked about it in his campaign. Everybody knows that if we don't get soon to health care reform and health care progress, we won't be able to afford the kind of health care that Americans need and want accessible to them and their families. Education, training. We're not going to be competitive in this world if we don't make sure our children are well educated. We're pricing young people and their families out of education. We can't afford to do that, or we won't compete with the Japanese, the Chinese, the Germans, the Indians, and others. Mark Zandi, a former economic advisor to Senator McCain's presidential election, found that, quote, the jobless rate will be more than 2%, 2 percentage points lower by the end of 2010 than without the fiscal stimulus. I'm sure almost every member of the House could find something that he or she thinks should not be in here. I know I could. I know others could. Some people want more in, some people want less in. But frankly, most of the economists I've talked to think this is about the right mix. May not be specifically what each wants, but about the right mix between tax cuts and spending. This legislation is the result of an honest, urgent effort to include the best ideas from economic experts from across the spectrum, as well as both sides of the aisle. It's an effort that cannot become weighed down by partisanship or parochial interests. There are no earmarks in this bill. Overall, this plan contains what is widely viewed as the right mix of spending and tax cuts to spur our economy. It will include tax relief for 95% of working families, tax cuts for job-creating small businesses, projects to put Americans to work renewing our crumbling roads and bridges, and nutrition, unemployment, and health care assistance to those families who are being hit hardest by this recession. This administration inherited the situation in which we find ourselves.